So we have looked at flights already. Let's do it again now with long distance flights. And there are always debates about whether longer the distance, the more economic it will get in terms of carbon footprint, because takeoff and landing are the most fuel intensive and so on and so forth. But remember that the longer the flight, more fuel the aircraft has to carry, so you're not really gaining much. And the author here of the book suggests that small hops are better when you want to do long distance. I am not so sure of that either, but one thing is certain, that flying in general is the most expensive mode of transportation we have. But I also love to fly, especially when there is no way to get, let's say, from India to US in a reasonable time without flying. One can take a ship, I suppose. But anyways, keeping all these things in mind, we can look at the there's a chopper. We can look at a flight from LA to Barcelona. LA, great city. Barcelona is awesome, beautiful. I would like to visit both for sure. 3.4 tons of CO2 equivalent if you took economy class. 4.6 tons of CO2 equivalent on average. 13.5 tons CO2 equivalents if you're flying first class, because you occupy more space, you consume more food, more alcohol, more per person services provided, and so on. And there is an old saying that if a plane crashes, then people in first class are no more safer than people in the economy class. On the other hand, if you are flying overnight and want to work next day, getting a full bed will make a big difference. So there are all kinds of choices involved, right? 3 economy trips are a whole year's worth of 10-ton living. One trip is equivalent to 340,000 disposable plastic carrier bags. So you can make these kind of comparisons so you get a sense of just how large a footprint such a long flight has, and this is quite a long flight. Okay, and longer flights are becoming now more common, and they are convenient for sure. Okay, so taking some stuff from BBC articles, this is also from 2020. This is how climate change can make you think about cutting your emissions from flying. So it's not saying don't fly, but how to cut your emissions from flying. If you can avoid flying, good for you. So here is CO2 emissions and non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, including water vapor, etc. And we'll see in a minute that depending on where the flight goes, the water vapor release can make a huge difference in terms of radiative forcing of the climate. Okay, so domestic average here, this is in hundreds of grams in CO2 and other. So CO2 is quite a bit, but you have equal amount of non-CO2 gases. Short haul economy is shorter, but does this mean long haul can be more economic by taking more short haul economy flights? Plus you will be spending a lot of time in airports, coming in and out of security and all that. So how do you account for that and your time? So one has to be careful. Nonetheless, short haul economy is less carbon intensive, and short haul business, so you increase your footprint by occupying more space, taking more service. So long haul economy, long haul business, and long haul fest. I think many of the aircrafts now don't really separate first and business, other than very few high-end airlines. But remembering again that whatever we do flying is worse than driving, which is worse than bicycling, which can be worse if you eat a lot of burgers and so on and so forth. Looking here in the UK and Europe, domestic flight in the UK, so the scales are different here, so be careful. 250 grams on average. Short haul Europe, long haul if you compare it to train or a bus, for example, bus has mostly CO2 emissions with very little non-CO2 emissions, and it's much smaller than all of these things. International train can be optimal if it is loaded properly with people. Same goes for all these things. Intercity train makes lots of stops and has lots of other ways in which it emits more CO2, not so much non-CO2 here. International train has no CO2, no non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. A medium-sized petrol car, single occupancy, can jump here. So obviously taking a bus train is better than driving, but driving can be worse than a short-haul European flight if you're driving by yourself. So how much time you want to spend comparing these? Simple rule: avoid flying if you can manage it. Avoid driving if you can manage it. Take the bus, train, or ride a bicycle, but don't eat too many hamburgers. Other details: the top 25 countries with the highest contributions to GHG emissions from aviation sector in 2019. So this is from this paper here. So emissions in million ton CO2 equivalent. USA, China are dominating here, and then the rest. But one has to be careful, because this is not just Americans flying. This is the idea of embedded carbon, where flights coming in and going out of US can be just mostly non-Americans. But China, big country, is having lots of domestic travel, just as US, which is a big continent. So it's unfair to, in some sense, to compare US and China to UK, because you would have to consider Europe as a continent in size and then look at it. So if you take UK, Germany, and France, Spain, and so on, maybe the numbers will look different. So EU wants to be one unit for currency and economy, but when it comes to greenhouse gases, it wants to do it separately. So I always find it a little bit dishonest. Okay, sorry. Okay, so as for where the aircraft can emit, these are the so-called contrails, where the water vapor and carbon emitted together create quick clouds, thin cirrus clouds, or what are called contrails, which actually can allow sunlight to come in, but they absorb the outgoing long wave. And this paper, the same paper we looked at, shows nicely, I think this figure I took from New Scientist, sorry I forgot to credit it, cumulative contrail energy forcing. 80% of the forcing is coming from just 2% of the flights. So 2% of the flights are providing 80% of contrail energy forcing. So small scale diversion strategy can completely avoid this contrail forcing, radiative forcing, which is significant. So it's not just the flight, but where you fly can make a difference as well. This paper also provides many factors of aviation emissions, increasing demand for alternative modes of short-haul travel, increasing passenger travel costs, awareness building activities. So there is carbon-intensive things like use of biofuels produced from waste and residues, switching to renewable power to liquid, putting a high price on carbon. So these are solutions for aviation emissions reductions, inefficient fleets, operational issues. It turns out that right now most of the air traffic control is done manually, and the optimality of flight paths is very difficult when it is done this way. So there is arguments made that just automating and computerizing the the air traffic controls can reduce emissions by up to 10%. Okay, so increasing uptake of Gen 2 aircraft, lightweighting of aircrafts, retrofitting fleets by fuel-efficient airframes, modernizing ground and air traffic travel system that I just mentioned. Then operational issues like improved intermodal transport planning. So cargo comes into the airport, picked up by trucks, taken to ships, and so on and so forth. this change can be managed better. Early retirement of aircrafts because they become less and less fuel efficient and require more maintenance and so on. Cyclic engine wash and improve land load factor. Okay, so lots of thought is being given to these sorts of things, but making flights more efficient and reducing emissions or even decarbonizing at some point is absolutely necessary, because I don't think not flying is really an option, because of course there is employment, tourism industry and so on, but just cultural exchanges. I want to be able to see the world. I want to see all the historic sites, all the exciting places to hike, all the exciting mountains, all the exciting wildlife and so on and so forth. And cultural exchanges have been a critical part of human evolution, even though aircrafts are much more polluting and they have arrived only recently, but obviously they have opened up many more opportunities for things that have pros and cons, but nonetheless I would say not flying is not an option, so we must find ways to make flying possible without damaging the environment.